Naya Knight Naderi made her way through the Sunshine District while the sun was setting. Naya walked under the streetlights while looking at the front sign of her place of business, the Violet Vaudeville, a burlesque dance theater, and where Naya worked. It was the metaphorical and literal center of the Sunshine District. During the day, the politicians in purple would talk about how the Sunshine District was dragging Isle City into Oceanus, and they would use that justification to withhold funds from the district. But then those same politicians would come out at night to spend their own wages on the same vices they denounced during the day. And even if Naya wanted to work somewhere other than the Violet Vaudeville, every other job in the Sunshine was much worse. She could be making sub-minimum wages working at tourist restaurants, where even more nudity was needed than in any burlesque show, and there was no stage to separate you from the grabby patrons. The canning factory paid alright, but they had strict 10-year-long contracts, which meant that if Naya started working at the cannery, that would be the only place she would be allowed to work for at least 10 years. And every other job in the Sunshine District was even less honest. She did try to apply for work outside the Sunshine District, but all it took was a single glance at the school she graduated from, or her home address, and then those applications were rejected immediately, with a smile and a "so sorry, good luck in your future pursuits." So here Naya was, doing the best possible work that existed in the Sunshine District of Isle City, a dancer in the Violet Troupe. Lost in her thoughts, Naya disappeared down a side alley, glancing at the long line in front of the theater already. Tonight's show was based on the play Politica, so naturally the controversy was drawing a large audience. Rumor was there were even talent agents in the crowd tonight, looking for models for a photo shoot. That was Naya's dream, to leave the Sunshine District and to be a world-famous model. Being able to visit Zama, Kartkadash, Kemet, or maybe even the Middle Kingdom, all while meeting fascinating people. But for now, Naya would have to worry about her own performance in Politica. She swiped her keycard and entered backstage. Swiping in clocked her in, but she would still have to worry about her makeup and getting dressed up. Heading to the crowded dressing room, Naya quickly took off her civilian clothes and got dressed in her outfit for the night. The first part of the outfit was a sky blue corset with some skin tone bottoms, and the oddest of all was fishnet stockings of the same sky blue color. And even over those, Naya had to wear a tearaway business suit. The same kinds of suits that were designed to be ripped and thrown aside. It was a shame when she looked at herself in the mirror. She enjoyed the way it looked on her, but she knew the suit was going to end up on the stage floor. Next was her heels. They were wider on the bottom than most heels businesswomen wore, but they were meant to conjure the idea of a businesswoman's heels. Hence why they were black leather instead of being clear or light up like most shoes worn by the dancers in the Violet Vaudeville. But now was Naya's last job before the show. Looking at her own face closely in the mirror, Naya began to put her makeup on her own face. While most of the dancers and performers helped each other with their makeup, and while Naya was happy to help, she didn't trust anyone else with her face. A bit of eyeliner and her eyes had a grand winged design that could be seen from the audience. A bit of eyeliner past the corner of her eyes, and she had 3 stars near both of her eyes. They were small, but it was part of her signature look. A literal starry-eyed look. The eyeliner done, she took her mascara and extended her eyelashes out. This one she didn't understand as much, but she knew that it was preferred. And then after she was done, she moved on to a less uncomfortable part of her face. Taking a brown lip liner, only slightly darker than her skin tone, she drew around her lips. After drawing the outline, she smiled at her own reflection, then blew herself a kiss, made an exaggerated frown, and even made a silly face. Sure enough, the outline stayed in place and worked for them all. Satisfied, she took her blue lipstick, the same shade as her corset and fishnets, and carefully rolled it onto her lips. She practiced Politica many times, but she was still unsure why the owner of the theater was very insistent on the blue outfit and coloration so much. He was very precise with the colors, going as far as to provide the makeup for her, when most of her makeup was either borrowed or she had to pay for herself. Still, though, she would put on her best show tonight. Naya looked at herself one last time in the mirror, while she took out her last piece of makeup. Eyeshadow with, sure enough, blue shading and some sparkles. One eye closed and gently applied the shadow to her eyelid before switching eyes, and then with both her eyes made up and done, Naya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then Hush opened her eyes with a big smile. Her sparkling white smile contrasted with her bright blue lips and eyes. She felt amazing, and she knew that she would do amazing tonight. All the worries of the outside world, the struggles and the fears and anxiety, all of that would be left here, and she would put on the best show in all of Isle City. Now, with a smile permanently on her mouth, Hush went around to the other performers to help them with their makeup and outfits. And as she went around helping them, she couldn't help but wonder about them. They all had stage names, like her, but that was all they shared. She often wondered what they did outside of the theater, but then she thought about her own life outside of the theater. She kept those worlds separate for a reason, and odds are, so did everyone else. The warm-up acts now done, Hush waited in the wings while she watched the previous act finish up. The story of an evil witch in all black leather, black lipstick, and white hair was trying to charm a good princess dressed in a translucent dress and white underwear to keep the teasing going, especially since the princess wasn't the main focus. The focus was the fight between the knight and the witch. Every spell spoken created a flash of brilliant lights, and a piece of the knight's armor fell off. And every swing of the knight's sword, another strap of the witch's leather outfit came off. The audience was hooked by the drama, and to see the reveal of what was under all the armor and all the leather. While Hush watched on, fascinated by what was unfolding in front of her, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder, and she turned to face the other performer of the Politica. Dressed in his own tearaway suit made gray, and with his hair cut in such a way he resembled a Josian boy band member. He wore almost as much makeup as Hush, but his makeup was supposed to look like he looked that way naturally, which was even more work than what Hush did. But he was one of the few men who worked in the Violet Vaudeville, and so he had to put it on quickly and make corrections between acts, often with just a few minutes. And he was also one of the very few people Hush considered a friend. His name was Charm In, and he was the other half of the Politica play. "You ready, Hush Puppy? This'll be your first time headlining, right?" Charm asked her, which she responded with a nod. She didn't want to feel her nerves, but they still occurred every time before a show, even though she knew she was ready. "Relax, it'll all go well. The practice is always harder than the show itself. And let me tell you a secret. Look at the front center row." Hush glanced that way, and sure enough, even in the dim light, Hush could see a man in a very nice suit, wearing a bright purple cravat. Purple wasn't unheard of in the Violet Vaudeville, but she never saw one that was comfortable being so close to the stage before. Normally they hid away on the balconies, hoping not to get caught by bloggers' cameras. So this man was clearly someone who didn't fear getting caught. "That's our ticket out of the sunshine. Give it your all, because I don't intend to give less. Besides, lucky for us, he's cute," Charm said to Hush, who shook her head and made an exaggerated, disgusted face. "He's not my type." "Too bad. He's mine," Charm responded without missing a beat, just as the final part of the performance came up. The knight and the witch were on their knees in front of each other. Both women were wearing nothing more but pasted-on tassels on their breasts and nylon leggings as they panted in an exaggerated manner, both to indicate that they were exhausted and to make themselves look as appealing as possible, before the knight stood up and lifted up her sword and swung it down, just as the witch lifted her hand up as if to cast one last spell. Just as the lights went out, leaving the results unknown to everyone in the audience. But the screams of both the knight and the witch rang through the theater. Even knowing it was fake, Hush felt a shiver run up her spine. But still, she knew the darkness was to give the performers a moment to get into position. The lights came back on, and both the witch and the knight laid on the floor, eyes closed, piled on top of each other, while the princess cried over their bodies, leaving it unknown to the audience who she was mourning for. This continued for a few moments as the lights gradually faded to black and the curtains dropped to the thundering applause to the performance. The curtain now down, the performers quickly got out of the way, and the stage techs got to work clearing out the old stage as both Hush and Charm got to their positions. "Bring the house down," Charm wished to Hush as he sat down on his stool with a newspaper while pretending to not be interested in Hush. Hush, meanwhile, got into position, ready to perform. The curtains rose, and Hush did her best bow towards the audience, while Charm pretended not to notice. "Showtime," she whispered to herself. A slow tune played from the band, while Hush spun over to where Charm was. She did a bow like she was trying to get his attention, and the only thing he did was keep reading his newspaper. So she spun closer to him, and the music picked up, in pace, along with her spinning. She bowed again, sliding her legs down across the floor so she was almost sitting on the floor, and then slid across the floor in the other way until she was standing again. If that sounds easy, try doing it in heels. But sure enough, the only response from Charm was he switched his position on the stool and was now facing away from Hush, who was still trying to get his attention. That drew whispers from the audience, especially from those in purple who likely have been seeing Politica since they were in grade school. Politica was ultimately a play about a woman who was trying to get an investor interested in her plans for business, but he keeps refusing to see her because he believes she's not important. Not realizing that the woman is indeed a princess, she ultimately has to go through an entire act to prove to the investor that she's worth investing in. But when he finally realized that she's the daughter of the emperor, suddenly every investment she asked for from him was approved immediately. So ultimately, she has him invest everything he has into her own ventures, throwing away good money after the bad. So she continues and continues until she takes everything he owns as punishment, intentionally investing them all into bad ideas, and then she moved on to the next investor. The moral of the Politica story was that it ultimately was best for the imperial family to run politics, because otherwise people would have no idea who is or isn't important and who is or isn't worth paying attention to. But translating that play to this stage was a bit different. Now the lights were starting to turn red, and now Hush was to collapse to the ground facing the audience. She held her head down low and pretended to wipe away a tear from her shadowed eyes. Actual tears would have smeared glitter around, but it gave the audience an idea of what she was supposed to be feeling. And sure enough, even though she could barely see the table in the front row, but she did notice the looks of concern. But now was the time for her next part of her performance. She tore at her suit and pushed herself up to her feet while a triumphant tune played, her suit on the ground and wearing her corset for everyone to see. She held a hand to the air like she was grabbing at a rope that wasn't there, but her other hand lay on her hip. But what Hush heard was something she never expected to hear from the audience. There was a gasp throughout the entire audience, and from Charm, like she did something truly scandalous. And while Hush was doing a striptease, she didn't think that was the cause of the gasp. But she managed to glance down at her outfit to make sure there was no malfunction, but she gulped when she saw her outfit. Every time they practiced this show, they didn't do it with the lights. The red lights changed the blue of the corset and her makeup to a much darker shade of purple, a color that was illegal for anyone to wear or paint with if they were outside of the imperial family. And now here Hush was, standing before an entire audience, committing treason in front of them all. Unable to change that fact, Hush decided to focus on what she was able to do. Hush smiled large to the audience and continued the show. Now standing up straight, she walked with strong strides, showing her character's confidence, while around her the reflected light appeared as purple sparkles. While Charm finally remembered his part after his initial shock, and he continued with his performance. Now he set down his newspaper while he approached her, reaching out for her, but she turned her head, and another gasp of a different tone was heard from the audience. That was good, though. That meant the audience was reacting the way they were supposed to. Shocked that anyone could see such a handsome man and turn away from him. Now Charm was to do his next part. He was to approach where she was walking, and he was to bow down low. And sure enough, there was Charm, laying down on his knees, face to the floor, and his hands stretched out across the floor. A pose that's clearly meant to show humility, and Hush was supposed to keep ignoring it. Even knowing it was a performance, she felt a twinge of guilt as she stepped over where Charm was kneeling. It was a long step, and she worried she may have stepped on him by accident, like she did in practice a few times before. But luckily, it was an easy step this time, and she strode to the other end of the stage, doing her best bored expression, with her hands on her hips. Now at the end of the stage, Hush shrugged simply and walked back to the side she came from. This was the time Charm was to escalate his way of drawing attention. Head down, he approached her with coins in his hands. They were cupped perfectly, and even though the coins were plastic, in the light of the stage, they glittered like gold. Now Hush peered down into his hand, a tap on her chin to show she was interested, but then she reached into his hand, grabbing a double handful of coins, and tossed the coins out to the audience. She could hear a scrabble for the coins as she stepped away from Charm again, walking to the outer edge of the stage. Here she crouched down on one leg and stared out over the audience, hand over her head like she was an explorer surveying a new land. This drew a few cheers from the audience, but she knew she was giving Charm a moment to get into position. After a long moment of fake surveying the audience, she turned back to face where Charm was on his knees and holding his hands together in mock prayer, as he was begging to give her his money and his assets. Keeping her hands on her hips, she shook her head and lifted her foot to his chest and pretended to kick him out of the way, which drew another shocked gasp from the audience as Charm rolled backwards at least 3 times before his clothes ripped off, revealing only his codpiece and tassels over his nipples. The kick and the reaction both looked dramatic and dangerous. However, Hush barely touched him, and Charm was just able to roll like that naturally. But now he was stripped down too, and he got up again. He was to do one last attempt to get her attention as she walked by one last time. In the Politica play, the businessman offered his wedding ring, the last thing he had of any value, his final attempt to ask her to let him invest in her, rather than letting her throw away his money. In the play, she took the ring from him and left him behind, leaving him in a ruined marriage with the now hateful wife. As Hush walked by Charm one last time, he offered her the ring he had on his hand. Here, Hush was to crouch down, which she did. Then Charm offered the ring from his hand to hers. She picked it up in her hands and looked it over, admiring it in front of the audience, before slipping it onto her own finger, and Charm brought his face close to hers like he was trying to kiss her. But Hush simply turned and stood, striding away one final time, leaving Charm alone on the stage while the lights faded from red to blue, showing him in a sad light while the curtains dropped. When the applause was heard, Charm quickly got up and walked with Hush to the backstage, while she kept her smile up, but started to feel the cold creep of panic shiver down her spine. "Great show," Charm told her. "Yeah, great show. Now I need to get out of this outfit quickly before I'm charged with treason," Hush said, keeping a smile on her face while making her way backstage, only to see that already there were people waiting for her. There was the man in the purple cravat, and a woman with a smartphone and glasses who seemed to be his lawyer or maybe his assistant. "Miss Hush Puppy, we wanted to have a word with you," the woman asked, not glancing up from her phone, while the man in the purple cravat never spoke, but he kept staring at her. Sure. Do you mind if I change first?" "We do mind, actually. We wanted to have a word with you immediately and in private," the woman said. Her tone was clear. She wasn't to be questioned. Hush turned to Charm, who only shrugged and walked away to his own changing room. "Good luck," he whispered while he headed off, leaving Hush alone with this strange man and woman. Hush led them to the private changing room. Most of the changing rooms were shared spaces, but there were a few private ones for the stars of the show. This was Hush's first time using the private room, and it was rapidly looking like it would be her last time using it too. The man sat in the only chair, leaving both the woman and the Hush to stand in silence. It wasn't even a minute before Hush spoke up. "So, what did you want to talk about?" she asked the man. She had a good assumption, but she didn't want to incriminate herself. The woman lifted up one hand while she kept texting with the other hand. "Do not directly address the Viscount of the Sunshine District. All questions are to be directed to me," the woman said. Hush felt her breath catch in her throat. The Viscount was the most powerful man in the district. An elected office, but one that you had to be in the imperial family before even being eligible to run. He ran unopposed her entire life. Hush then directed her question to the woman. What did you want to talk about?" Hush asked, while the woman withdrew a series of pages that were stapled together from inside of her jacket pocket. "We wish to hire you for a modeling shoot on Rosea Insula. We want to take you out for a few hours this weekend for the shoot and compensate you accordingly. We understand that you've been trying to get into modeling for a while. Think of this as your foot in the door." The woman said it all without making eye contact with Hush, while Hush took the forms from the woman. Hush tried reading over the forms, but it was dense, so she tried to read it one sentence at a time, while the woman continued. Your payment will be made upon completion of the job. You will be allowed to keep the headshots for your portfolio. Sorry, headshots for my what? Hush asked, but the woman ignored her while she continued. And the payment, as you can see on page 17, will be 100 aura along with 5 aura up front. At those words, Hush turned to page 17, and sure enough, Hush could see the woman was telling the truth. We will allow you to go over the form. If you have any questions, you can ask us, or if you want a lawyer to go over it, you don't need to respond immediately, but we would appreciate an answer by... The woman didn't even get a chance to finish before Hush pushed the forms back into the woman's hands. Her name signed on where it asked her to sign. The woman finally looked up from her phone for the first time and looked down at the form, then back up at Hush. She was not expecting Hush to sign it so quickly. You read it all already? Oh yeah, I'm a really fast reader. Do you want a copy for your records? Well, I'd rather not waste the paper. So, you agree to everything in the contract? Completely. Well, if you're certain, here's your payment up front, and we will email you the details. The woman withdrew 5 golden coins from her pocket and placed it in Hush's hands. You already have my email? Yes. Any other questions? Hush glanced down at the coins in her hand and shook her head. Everything was going well. Even a single aura was worth more than she made in 2 weeks of working at the Violet Vaudeville. But 100 auras? That was enough for her to finally leave the Sunshine District behind. No, I don't have any other questions. See you then, Hush said while both the Viscount and his assistant left. Now done with that, Hush felt her smile fall down. There was only a few more minutes before final curtain call, but she knew she was going to have to be on stage with everyone else. But for now, she was just happy she finally got her break out of the Sunshine District. After the final curtain call, Naya left the theater dressed in her civilian clothes again. Her makeup wiped away from her face while she made her way first to the ATM and then to her apartment. The ATM was a lone shining light in the darkness as she made her way to it. Checking around and satisfied that there was no one around, she entered her bank account number and PIN to the number pad. She knew other countries used plastic cards to allow people to pay for things and to access their accounts. But the Empire of the Seven Cities still used specie and checks. Banknotes, paper money, digital payments, and credit cards were not used at all in the Seven Cities. Wire transfers, bank-to-bank transfers, direct deposit, and even money orders were all only used by the largest of businesses. And the ATMs here all reflected that fact throughout the Seven Cities. They had a coin slot for accepting coins, and a coin tray for depositing them, a check reader, and a tray for requesting free blank checks so the bank customer had easy access to checks at all times. Still though, as Naya entered the last number, her accounts displayed before her, all in yellow. She had a single account that acted as both a checking and savings account. The yellow around it indicated a warning that she was low on funds. Sure enough, her account only had 7 centi in it. Maybe enough for some dog wagon food, but then she'd end up paying fees to the bank. But as she clicked the blue button that said deposit, the coin slot clicked open as she slid the 5 aura into the slot. Clunk. The screen changed to 2007 centi. Clunk. It went up even further. Clunk. 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 With a final clunk, her account now read that she had 10,007 centi. It was no longer in yellow, and Naya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She hadn't had that much money in her account before. Not ever. It felt good to have some actual money. The machine asked if she was done, but she asked for one last thing. A checkbook with 100 checks. They were free for the convenience of the customers, but Naya never really had a reason to carry around checks with her, since her account rarely ever went over 1,000, and never for very long. But now she was eager to treat herself tonight. After picking up a hamburger steak for herself, she went home to her apartment. It was on the 3rd floor of a concrete complex that didn't bother ever fixing the broken elevator for as long as Naya had been alive. Passing by old worn doors, Naya finally came to her door, where she opened it and stepped inside, turning on the dim light within. The cold bulb showed her futon, small kitchen, and a single outlet that held her charging cord. Naya took the chance to eat on her futon as she looked around her bare apartment. Soon, she'd move on past this place. She knew it used to be a workman's apartment. Back when the city was being built, these were meant to be temporary work apartments. But after the workers left, the landlord bought it up and rented it out with almost no improvements. So here, Naya lived alone in the same apartment that her mother was born in, unable to leave because rent everywhere else in the Sunshine District was just so much higher. Naya sighed as she ate her hamburger steak, playing music on her phone while she ate. She had spent her entire life living in the same 4 walls with a small closet and a small bathroom, but now she could go somewhere else. Maybe her new place would have a window to look over the city. Maybe it would even have a bigger kitchen. Maybe it would even have more than one closet. These thoughts and more warmed Naya as she ate and guided her through her bedtime routine. After a few more normal days at work, it was finally time for Naya to take her photo shoot. She stood on a dock in the marina before dawn. The marina was fenced off from the rest of Isle City, and for good reason. The boats here were the kinds of yachts and ships you'd see on magazines for wealth, and the gates here were for keeping people like Naya out. Thankfully, the security guard let her in without issue and guided her to the Viscount's yacht. A large ship with purple eyes painted just above the waterline. Naya was on the pier looking up at it because she was waiting for someone else to come get her and to escort her onto the boat. After waiting for nearly 2 minutes, she got bored and made her way on board. As soon as she made her way to the deck, the woman from a few days ago came out of somewhere deeper on the ship to grab her hands and lead her downstairs. "Good, you're here, so your room is ready. Get your swimsuit on and the makeup artist will get started on you." "I'm not usually comfortable with people near my face. Can I put on my own makeup?" The woman let out a flat laugh. "Ha, no. You're modeling now. Your makeup is done for you. Your check is in your room. Be ready for the artist in 10 minutes. We leave in 5 minutes. Any questions?" What's your name?" Naya asked, and for the second time, the woman looked up from her phone to look Naya in the eyes. Like she was checking to see if Naya was being honest or if she was lying. After a moment, she answered, "My name is May, and here's your room. You have 9 minutes now," May said, opening the door and practically shoving Naya into the room, closing the door very quickly behind her. Now, in a new space, she looked over the room. This room was even bigger than her apartment. A mirror with lights and even a makeup desk attached to it. The closet was open, but she could see it had plenty of space. On the bed was a large basket full of muffins, bottles of juice, water, and even a few different brands of soda. They really went all out for her, Naya decided while she approached the makeup desk. And sure enough, there was a check lying on it. Taking out her phone, she opened her bank app to deposit the check. A quick picture of both sides and an email later, and now her account had 210,000 centi in her account. Naya couldn't help but let out a happy squeal. That kind of money was a life changer. The moment she was done modeling here, she was going straight to Lavender Heights for her modeling career. Now that the check was deposited, Naya checked the swimsuit out. It was a simple one-piece, the one with thin straps over the shoulders and a missing back with a few strings to bridge the gap. There was also virtually no leg on the swimsuit and way too low of a V-neck. Not the most revealing thing she had ever worn, but there was one small detail about it that gave her pause. The entire thing was royal purple. Naya paused. The Viscount clearly saw the performance, so he must think she looks good in purple. And since he's part of the royal family, if anyone asked, he gave it to her. Naya, then seeing the time on her phone, decided it was time to get ready. She left the clothes she wore to get on the ship in the closet along with her phone. After changing into the swimsuit, she looked at herself in the mirror. She felt good in this, and it would help her persona as Hush. Hush put on her biggest smile just in time for a knock at the door. "Hair and makeup," a man's voice called from the other side. Hush opened the door to let him in, along with a large team of people. Turns out hair and makeup preparations for modeling was a lot longer and a lot more complicated than makeup and hair for a burlesque show. And for burlesque shows, it could take hours depending on the makeup needed. Here, though, the sun was 2 or 3 hours away from rising when they left Isle City. And when both her hair and makeup were finally done, they were on Rosea Insula, and the sun was well above the horizon. And out on the warm sands, the real work began. They started simple, having her in sunglasses looking out into the horizon. At first, it felt easy. It stopped feeling easy after the 50th photograph. And then it started feeling tedious after the 100th. But still, pictures were taken, orders were given by May as they moved on from scene to scene. Pictures of Hush laying on her stomach on the beach. Pictures of her sitting on the beach looking out over the oceans. Pictures of her posing with a sandcastle that was made by the technicians, but she had to pretend she was the one making it in the pictures. But Hush did have fun knocking it over when they were done with it. It took the team of technicians 3 hours to build the castle. Hush spent 30 minutes taking pictures with it, and when done, they said it was okay for her to knock it all down. She knocked it down in less than 30 seconds, leaving only the warm pink sand on her toes while looking out over the ocean before moving on to her next photo shoot. It was now low tide, and there was a beautiful lagoon. The way the setting sun and the pink sand mingled with the clear water, it made it look like Hush was floating in a glass of rosé wine. That was more peaceful than simply trying to float in the warm water. Feeling the ocean drift her worries away while she could pretend for a few moments she was alone and with no problems in the world. Until May called out more orders or said that Hush was drifting too far away before bringing her back. But when done with the lagoon shots, everyone headed back to the yacht. Hush was given a towel, softer than any she had before, as she headed back to the yacht, with May guiding Hush back to her room by hand. "So, just get yourself dressed and we can have dinner. Dinner is in 30 minutes. We're having sushi on the top deck. Any questions?" May asked while she was texting someone, while Hush cleared her throat and decided to shoot her shot. "Do you have any time off?" she asked May, who didn't glance up. "I get off when I get off." "No, I mean, I was wondering, since the shoot is over, if you want to talk about dinner sometime." "Dinner's in an hour," May said before recognition finally hit her eyes. Oh, is that what you mean? She asked while Hush only nodded. May, for the first time, smiled and put her phone away. I think they'll be okay without me for 30 minutes, she said as both Hush and May entered Hush's room together. At the dinner, there was indeed a large sushi spread, larger than any that Naya had seen before. Dressed in her day clothes now, the photographers and technicians barely recognized her anymore. May sat next to Naya, phone away and smiling and laughing with everyone while they ate together. The Viscount was nowhere to be seen and hadn't been seen all day. One of the best pieces of sushi, in Naya's opinion, was a very pink piece of fish that was the size of the palm of her hand. She never had any sushi before that was that large, tender, and flavorful. What is this? She asked May, who smiled as she explained. Kaiju sushi, locally sourced, but even then it's nearly 4 centi a kilogram. But it's just so good, isn't it? May asked while Naya ate some more. It didn't take long, though, for Hush to start feeling dizzy. May, seeing that, led her back to her room. Hey, if you're still sick when we get back, we'll take you to the hospital, she asked, making sure Naya was comfortable in bed before leaving, turning the light off as she left. And while Naya tried to sleep, she had strange dreams. Dreams of a deep muscular pain that was throughout her entire body. It didn't ease except when she flexed her entire body. But then the dream progressed to something more like a night terror. Something pressed down against both her chest and then also pushed her legs and arms closer and closer to her torso. But unlike other night terrors, there was no dark figure, just her shut eyes. But as the pressure tightened, it suddenly vanished, and now able to stretch out and breathe freely, she felt odd tingles in her fingertips and toes as the dream continued. But it seemed to cycle between the tingling in her extremities and then pressure before the pressure was gone, and every time the pressure lasted less and less than it did the time before. As Naya continued her rest until finally the tingling and pressure stopped and something splashed on her face. Finally opening her eyes, Naya noticed that she was floating freely in the ocean, the yacht nowhere in sight while she floated on the gentle waves. Naya began to tread water while she took stock of what was happening around her. She could see the shore in the distance, but no yacht, and after a few moments in the ocean, Naya realized that she wasn't wearing any clothes. The reason why it took so long for her to realize was the ocean didn't feel cold at all. It was night and the sun was down, so normally the water would at least be enough to make her shiver. But instead, it didn't feel cold at all. It was just perfectly pleasant. Did she fall out of the ship somehow, or maybe she was left behind? Shaking her head, the dizziness now gone, Naya turned to the distant shore. Maybe she'd be able to make her way home without being seen, or she could find a vanguard working somewhere who could get her clothes. But as Naya swam towards the shore, something felt wrong. The shore was getting closer, but it was getting closer a lot quicker than it should have. Naya was a strong swimmer, but still, the shore had gone from a distant dot to almost doll size before she lost her breath. Even as she got closer and closer, something approached from the horizon. At first, thinking it was a vanguard boat, she tried to wave them down, but as it got closer, something was very wrong with this boat. It was only about 5 feet long, and it was way too small to hold anyone larger than a doll. But the ship still had the big snake encircling a stick that was used by the vanguard. Maybe there was a nighttime tourist playing with their boats late at night? But as the boat got closer, Naya could see small movement on the deck. Peering closer, she could see they looked like little people, doll-sized and some of the most realistic dolls she had ever seen. One of the sailor dolls even tried to wave at Naya, only for her to wave back. Hello? Naya asked, reaching her hands out to the boat to feel it, to see if it was real. One hand in front of the boat and the other behind it, with both trying to reach to grab it. But while she was trying to grab it, one of the moving dolls went to the harpoon on deck and aimed it at her. Curious, Naya had time to tilt her head just in time for the harpoon to fire directly at her neck. Naya felt a light sting like a mosquito bite, so she smacked where it hit, just as an electric tingle, which could be felt where the harpoon hit. It kinda reminded her of the buzzer toys used by kids, only not quite as powerful. It was enough to help wake her up, but it didn't hurt. But it certainly was annoying. That was rude, Naya said, tearing the harpoon out of her skin, which also jerked the harpoon gun out of the deck, which was still attached to the harpoon via the line. The sailor doll managed to let go of the gun in time, but all of them were staring up at Naya's face with apparent awe. Whoever designed these moving dolls, Naya was very impressed. She would have loved a toy like that when she was waking up. Listen here, don't hurt people, or I'm taking all your toys away, Naya said as she swung her arms through the water, creating a wave that pushed the toy boat away. Now the wave was clear, she continued her swim to the shore that was only about 20 feet away from her. After the giant woman nearly capsized the boat, the captain quickly made his way to the radio to call out to his colleagues that were still within the Sunshine District. We have a problem. I know you're all still dealing with the Monday, but we just had a Keto who entered the Sunset District from the ocean. I'm not sure of her limits, but she just shook off 20 megawatts, and I don't even think we annoyed her. She's on her way to you. Contact all the hunters. We have a Yuko scenario on our hands, and we do not need it to escalate, the captain said as he watched the woman make her way deeper into the city. Naya, now on the shore, was more confused than before. The size of the city was all wrong. The city streets were too narrow, barely enough for her to walk by, and the cars that were parked were smaller than her feet. A lot of the buildings were also too easy for her to look over, revealing HVAC systems that were normally hidden from view. And despite how small everything looked, there was something else. The streets were all empty. This had to have been a model or something that a hobbyist had made that she somehow stumbled upon. The city couldn't have been shrunken, and even if it had, the streets wouldn't be empty. The Sunshine District always had something happening on them. Many people said that Isle City never slept because of the fact that it was always active, especially here. Still, as she wandered deeper into the streets, the level of detail was something that even the most obsessive hobbyist would never get right. All the graffiti that fit exactly where it was supposed to go, but at 1/16 the scale. And it smelled like the city. All the untreated sewage and gas fumes, alcohol, and the unidentifiable smell of city that you never really noticed until you returned from somewhere else. No way that any hobbyist would have that level of detail. And if this wasn't a model, then there was only one possible reason, no matter how improbable it was. The city didn't shrink. Naya was gigantic. This was confirmed for her when a little helicopter buzzed by her face. It looked like it could be held in the palm of her hand, but the people inside were clearly trying to get her attention and trying to convince her to leave. Tilting her head, one of the tiny people took out a megaphone and called out to her. "You need to leave. Master Monday's almost here." "Who's Master Monday?" Naya asked the helicopter, who only flew away in response. But Naya became aware of the shaking of the earth, like something heavy was making its way towards her. And sure enough, on the intersection a few blocks away, something grabbed the building corner and pulled itself into view. Master Monday was at least 70 feet tall, so he was still 10 feet shorter than Naya, but despite being short, he was intimidating in quite a few other ways. He looked like an ancient and scarred crocodile that learned how to walk on its hind legs. His long tail dragged behind him, and his scales were a gray-green color that looked like it was made for both blending into the swamp and the ocean. His eyes were reptilian and orange, but the intelligence behind them told Naya that he was no mindless animal like the other large reptiles that thrived in Isle City. And if that wasn't enough, in his right hand was a trident that was longer than Naya was tall, and it was white as ivory. If Naya was to guess, Master Monday carved the trident from a single bone of a creature much larger than Naya could dream of. And in the reptile's left hand, he dragged a large net, made of chains large enough to hold shipping crates. Naya could see that it was just dragging the net along the road, but just by it dragging, he ruined the road and all the buildings that he tapped with the net. And strapped to the crocodilian's waist by even more chains that looked like they were made for holding ships was a curved knife made of the same material as the trident. Whatever Master Monday was, his weapons reminded Naya of the net fighters that the Roman gladiators used. Still, though, Master Monday did not hesitate when he saw Naya. He lifted his trident and threw it towards her with great force. As the trident cracked the air with enough speed to crack the windows it passed by, Naya felt something deep inside of her react to the trident. It was a little bit like when Hush was dancing. The world slowed down, and the only thing that mattered was the beat and acting on time to the beat. Thump. Hush's heart was beating, providing the beat to dance to while the trident grew closer. Thump. Naya wanted to dodge, but she felt Hush's confidence. Now was not the time to react. Thump. The trident was close enough that Hush could see the water glisten off of its points. Now it was the time to act. Hush reached out with her arm and grabbed the trident by the shaft as she let herself pirouette on the wet asphalt in her bare feet, which is far from an easy task. But Hush let the momentum of the trident throw help her pirouette as she added her own speed to the momentum as she spun in place. When she turned back to face Master Monday, Hush felt her familiar smile return to her face. The same smile she gave to the world when she performed, when she was standing before a theater committing treason. The same smile she gave when she was bruised, beaten, and broken, but still gave her all in the performance. The smile that said she was on top of the world, and that she was never going to fall. Her pirouette complete, she threw the trident back at Master Monday, adding her own strength and power to Master Monday's momentum, making the trident twice as powerful as before. Where the kaiju's throw cracked windows just by flying by with such speed, Hush's throw shattered all windows on the block, and the trident found its mark, cutting into the monster's chest. Despite all of the power in Hush's toss, though, Master Monday's scale proved to be too tough to cut too easily, but still, the trident brought blood to the surface as the crocodile tore it out of his side, leaving the trident on the ground while he roared at Hush. Even from down the block, Hush could smell the fish on his breath and feel the air from his roar. The timbre of the sound could be felt in every bone in her body, and it even felt like her heart was supposed to be fluttering, but instead her heart kept the same beat as before, The beat didn't change, so she didn't need to change her dance. She wouldn't let the crocodile disturb her with his roar. She would keep in control of this dance and all that was happening in it. Hush's smile, still on her face, grew a bit wider as she let out a giggle. Not a normal giggle of a performance, nor the giggle of something funny. A giggle that she'd never heard from her own lips before, but one she knew when it came out was always inside of her. The giggle of someone who had tasted her own power and who was eager to have it all. "Come on, little lizard, show me what you can do," Hush said, gesturing for Master Monday to come forward. What she didn't expect for him to do was to lunge towards her outstretched arm, as his vice-like jaws squeezed over her arm quicker than Hush could process. After a few beats of Master Monday jerking his head back and forth like a dog trying to shake a bone, Hush felt her initial panic fade. His jaws were indeed clamped over her arm, and he was trying to death roll her arm away from her body, but despite the fact, she wasn't actually in pain. She could feel that the teeth from his jaws were sharp, but they were more like forked tines than razors, like she was expecting. And despite his great size, his strength did legitimately feel like he was no more dangerous than a small dog. She didn't even lose her balance, and she could see in his eyes Master Monday was recognizing that Hush wasn't reacting the way she was supposed to. Another, louder giggle escaped her lips. "Is that your best? Why don't I return the favor?" Hush said, as before she was aware of what she was doing. She reached her other arm into his jaw. Specifically, she grabbed his lower jaw with her left hand and started to pull down while she used her right arm like a lever to pull up his upper jaw. And sure enough, she was prying open his jaws, foot by foot. Master Monday's eyes became wider as he tried to squeeze down harder on Hush's arms, as she continued to pry it wider and wider, while his arms ineffectually tried to scratch at her. Again, she was aware that his claws were sharp, but they were sharp in the same way that paper might be sharp. She was sure her chest was covered in scratches, but she doubted the kaiju did any real damage to her, as she kept prying his jaw open, until... crack! A loud crack echoed through the Sunset District as Master Monday's lower jaw fell away and he fell to his hands and knees on the street. Though Hush couldn't see it very well, she could see that his lower jaw was still hanging down, and she was certain that even a crocodile's jaws were not supposed to drop down to their chest. And crocodiles were certainly not supposed to be making whimpers while blood dripped from their mouth. Somehow, that sight brought an actual laugh from Hush's lips. It didn't make sense, though. It wasn't funny in a traditional sense, and yet there was a creature that was trying so hard to hurt her that just failed so badly. All he managed to do was leave a few impressions on her skin where his teeth tried to tear through her skin, and she left him practically broken, and he wasn't able to process it. But she wasn't even trying to hurt him that bad. Yet. But she would be sure that if Master Monday was scared of her now, she was going to make sure he was going to have nightmares for the rest of his life. "Dislocated jaw? Don't worry. I can fix that," Hush said. Master Monday looked up just in time to see the kick coming from his lower jaw, but he didn't look up in enough time to try to dodge it. Her foot connected with his lower jaw as his jaws snapped shut again, with enough force that he fell backwards onto the ground. His whimpering now turned into gurgling moans that echoed through the city streets, while blood kept leaking from his mouth and nostrils. His eyes now shut, Hush felt a rush in her heart and a heat behind her temples. It was like she was electric and every cell vibrated with this power, that she didn't know about just an hour ago. This power was distracting at first, until she became dimly aware that the helicopter had returned, and the person with the loudspeaker was speaking again. Keto, Keto, are you aware of what I am saying? Does the black moon howl? They called out, and that last phrase roused something else from her heart. Something that felt like ice in her veins, cooling her rage and quenching her desire for power. She could still feel the strength, the power, and how much she was angry at this creature for wanting to hurt her. But now she could have thoughts about things other than the fight. A small part of her was worried. What would Hush have done if the helicopter didn't ask her that question that cooled her head? She howls when she hunts. She howls when she's hunted, Hush responded in a half-trance. Unsure of why she answered that way, but it felt right to respond that way. Okay, good, you're responding. If you can, drag Master Monday into the ocean. Once that's done, the fight will be over, the loudspeaker said. I'm pretty sure I already ended the fight, Hush asked, cracking a knuckle in her confidence. But that only brought another crackle to the loudspeaker. Your fight is over. What about everyone else who lives in this district? Do you want them all to abandon their homes because there's a kaiju permanently living there? They asked. At first, Hush almost said she didn't care about them, but a twinge in her heart said otherwise. She lived here not too long ago, and what about Charmed? He lived in the district also, and everyone who lived here because they couldn't live anywhere else. So if Master Monday stayed, Charm would have to try to find a new home, but probably be unable to. Have to find a new job, and again be unable to. And try to find a new life, which she ended before it began. And there were thousands of people like Charm. All of them deserved to have their own homes and their lives as uninterrupted as possible. I'll bring him to the ocean, Hush said, grabbing Master Monday's tail as she dragged him through the streets as he kept making his gurgling noises while she made her way back to the beach. As she passed by the trident, she paused before picking it up with her other hand. The trident felt good in her hands, and as it turned out, it was just as easy to drag Master Monday with a single hand. The helicopter flew overhead, while Hush finally made her way to the ocean. As she waded into the surf, dragging the crocodilian kaiju behind her, as his body floated in the surf, as Hush made it to where it was waist deep for her, so it was at least 40 feet deep. So Hush decided it was now time to toss Master Monday into the deeper water. And while what happened next only took a few seconds, it felt like it took eons, even though Hush couldn't react in time. Hush noticed that Master Monday's eyes were open again as he was tossed into the deeper water. And she noticed as he threw the net with heavy chains over her. The net didn't cover all of her, but it did tangle with her legs as Master Monday swam deeper into the dark waters of the ocean, pulling Hush along and dragging her underwater. She didn't even have time to catch her breath as she was pulled deeper and deeper underwater as she struggled trying to get out of the net. She couldn't even see where he was, so she could try to strike at him. She blindly stabbed where she thought she felt him, but her trident hit nothing but water as she started to feel the cold of the water on her skin and the burning of her lungs. Whatever this power was, it didn't seem to extend to breathing underwater, nor giving her any stronger ability to hold her breath. She felt lightheaded as she kept stabbing slower and slower as she felt her heart slow. Hush couldn't believe it. After fighting a kaiju and embracing this strange thing that happened to her, this was how she was going to die. drowned by the same creature she believed she made powerless before the world. But something changed in her when she had that thought. Hush never felt powerless. She was on the stage and the world was hers to have power over. That didn't change here, and that would never change anywhere. That wouldn't change now, and she was certain that it would never change any time. She was even more certain of it than her own existence. If the world was telling her this was where she died, then she would face the entire world and tell them that it was wrong. As Hush felt the ocean within her heart push against the ocean around her, she felt the beat of her heart and how it compared to the beat of Master Monday's tail. There was a mismatch between the two. So that was simple to fix. When you were a beat off, you adjusted. Hush exhaled the last of her breath while her heart slowed more. She was certain her body would have passed out or even died by now in normal circumstances. But Hush refused to accept death, and she refused to accept loss. And with that impossible burden held at bay, her mind cleared to see things she normally wouldn't have noticed. She felt the way the water moved when Master Monday's tail passed by her legs. So she waited, the beat of her heart finally matching the beat of Master Monday's tail. She felt his tail pass by her again. It went away and began to come back. Now was when she struck. Her rage at Master Monday, her rage at her situation, her rage at her life in the sunset, her rage even at her choices, and even all the rage she had for herself, that she didn't want to admit was there, but always was there. She felt all those rages and more explode out of her heart, giving her the strength to strike with her trident. She knew it struck when the net fell away from her legs and she began to float. Now certain which way was up, she swam with all of her remaining strength. And despite how deep she thought she was, it only took 3 strokes for her to reach the surface and burst out, gasping for air. After a few gasps, Hush felt her arms and legs start shaking. Her smile faltered as she felt a rush of emotions. First, she started laughing, just a way to let out tension from the situation, before her laughs turned to cries as she began to process what was happening, which then turned to sobs when everything became too much for her to handle, as she stopped being able to tread water. Not able to see the shore through her teary eyes, Hush kept sobbing before she let herself drift and start floating on her back, the trident weakly held in her arms, as her sobs turned quiet, as she let the ocean gently caress her again that day. She still cried, and she still felt too much too quickly, but she let her emotional ocean mingle with the ocean around her. But as the waves pressed against her, she let her muscles relax, as she started to feel just how sore she was. Her lungs still burned like she ran a marathon all by herself, and every muscle in her arm and legs felt like she did the role of every performer of the Violet Vaudeville for a week. So she let herself relax, and her smile naturally returned. This was nice in its own way, she thought to herself as she drifted to sleep. When Hush washed up on the shore half an hour later, her muscles were no longer sore, and she was able to breathe without pain. But she was also as hungry as a dragon. But fortunately, she was found by the vanguard by the beach. Everyone there was so nice, and everyone wanted to meet her and personally thank her for chasing away Master Monday. It normally took weeks, if not months, if ever, to chase away a kaiju. The vanguard even managed to give her a large tarp, usually reserved for wrapping the tops of shipping containers, to use as a blanket and to cover herself. They even offered her some food, but it took them a few trucks worth of granola bars before Hush's stomach stopped growling. But it didn't take long before the vanguard arrived that the photographers arrived also. They couldn't get past the barricades, but Hush could still see the camera flashes, while they all tried to get the best shot of the heroic giantess. But something felt different from these cameras and the cameras that she saw just earlier that day. While modeling, Hush still had control over her posing and some control over what photos were taken and which ones weren't. There was at least communication between the photographer and the subject. But here, there was no communication. Hush was just the spectacle and they were the spectators. She wasn't sure if she liked the difference. But there was something else that was different in Hush also. Not merely the fact that she was 16 times bigger, heavy as a blue whale, and as powerful as a titan, though those were the most obvious differences. But now, she was no longer in a panic. She had a time to self-examine and to analyze both her thoughts and her meta-thoughts. The way she viewed herself was different. The weight on her heart, one that had been there for so long that she forgot it was even there, it was gone. She never breathed so freely before, and she never felt as calm as she did now. Her thoughts, which used to run so quickly that she felt like she was screaming in her own head, they were calm, slow, organized, and felt right. She wasn't more logical than before, and she was definitely feeling all of her emotions, but Hush no longer felt at war with herself like Naya was. She felt like she made peace with something inside of her, but what was it she made peace with? She wasn't certain, but she enjoyed the sense of peace, power, and patience that flowed through every nerve in her body, while she watched all of the little people try to make their way around her where she sat. She had known this feeling before, when she was performing, but Hush never realized it was possible to always feel like this. One of the tiny people approached her. She was dressed in a business suit, and even though most people spent their time around Hush, either staring at her or pretending not to stare, this woman didn't seem interested at all. Hush watched as she approached, picking up a megaphone and speaking in a familiar voice. "I'm here to negotiate a contract between you and Vanguard. You will help them with the disasters that occur in Isle City. In exchange, they will pay you and provide you a place to live. We are drawing up the contract to be big enough for you to read as we speak, but I wanted to have a preliminary approval before approving so much paperwork," the woman said, as Hush finally recognized the woman before her. It was May. She looked different at the scale. Her face and features were too hard to see unless she focused and got close. But her voice and the way she carried herself, the Viscount's assistant carried herself with confidence even with everything that happened. "Do you recognize me?" Hush asked, which only drew a shake of May's head. Hush leaned close to get a closer look. This was indeed May, but she had no idea why May didn't recognize Hush. Maybe with the difference in size, she had no way of recognizing Hush. She did look very different out of makeup, and different enough that people didn't recognize Naya as being the same woman as Hush. But at this scale, she must not look like herself at all. So Hush decided to try something else. "Okay, I will agree to read over the contract carefully because I want to make sure that I understand everything," Hush said, which drew May's face up as both of their eyes met. They were close enough that Hush could see May's eyes widen with recognition as she asked without the megaphone. "It's you. You're Hush," Hush said, holding her finger up to May's mouth, covering her entire mouth, but still bringing a blush to May's face as she finally recognized the giantess who saved Isle City. Hero, hush. I will make sure your contract is fair, and I look forward to our dinner. May said the last part quietly, which brought a fresh, genuine smile to Hush's lips.